When their songs and artwork have been banned in multiple countries, you really have to ask yourself, is this the kind of music I want my kids listening to? Well, only if they can't read the lyrics, song titles, or see the artwork. This is a group that has not only faced religious outcry, but have also been accused of quite literally making the United States look bad by a US politician. In an article published on June 1st, 1995, it was reported that Senator Bob Dole said this: "We have reached the point where our popular culture threatens to undermine our character as a nation. I would like to ask the executives of Time Warner a question. Is this what you intended to accomplish with your careers? You have sold your souls, but must you debase our nation and threaten our children as well?" He said this during a speech aimed at gathering support from conservative Republicans for his then presidential campaign. He specifically mentioned the films Natural Born Killers and True Romance, whilst also directly citing a rap group called Ghetto Boys, along with Cannibal Corpse. How anyone like Bob Dole ever came to be aware of them in the first place is quite a mystery. I'm quite sure they didn't frequent the same yacht club together. Nevertheless, this was quite an achievement, being accused of making your own country look bad simply because of the music you play. Other countries that also took offense to this group included Australia, Germany, and Russia, where either albums were outright banned from being sold in stores, or tours had to be cancelled due to religious protesting.
Jesus, you need to be born again. You need to be washed in the blood.
So how did we get here? What could possibly be so horrific in nature that an entire country would refuse to even display your record in their shops? Well, we're going to find out. This is Shredded Humans, the story of Cannibal Corpse.
That's right! Cannibal Corpse! Let's go!
Buffalo, New York, 1988. Members from various death metal bands in the Buffalo area at the time would join together to create a new and musically violent project. Those early groups would be Beyond Death, Tyrant Sin, and Leviathan. Singer Chris Barnes and drummer Paul Mazurkowitz had known each other since 7th grade, growing up just one street apart. They started jamming together, but not with actual instruments. They were air jamming. We were really like brothers, almost at a certain point in time. My family was really close to his mom and dad. We would just jam out to whatever, Metallica, Exciter, anything totally heavy. I thought, we're pretty good at faking it, we might as well just try it for real. Everyone knows Metallica, probably one of the most commonly cited influences for any thrash or heavy metal band to come out of the late 80s and 90s. Their debut record, Kill 'Em All, released in 1983, helped to set somewhat of the gold standard for thrash music early on. Exciter, on the other hand, doesn't often receive the same attention. Exciter are a speed metal band formed in Canada in 1978, named after the Judas Priest song of the same name. Exciter released their first record in 1983, Heavy Metal Maniac. Paul, Chris, and Rich Ziegler were in high school together and decided to form a band one day while sat in Ziegler's basement, before any of them even knew how to play an instrument. Chris wanted to play bass, but nobody else wanted to sing, so he took the job on vocals. They still needed a guitar player, enter Bob Rusey. He was a year above them in high school. That first band would become Tyrant Sin. This was 1985, 3 years prior to Cannibal Corpse. They started out as a cover band. Chris recalls how they started with Pink Floyd, but quickly moved on to covering bands like Accept, Celtic Frost, and Exciter. If I'm not mistaken, our first song we attempted was a Pink Floyd song, and that ended real quick. Chris, though, decided to quit the band and join a group called Leviathan, and they actually had a following. They were an underground band that other people looked up to. They released a demo in '87 called Legions of Undead. Tyrant Sin would eventually bring a new singer in, Dennis Glinsky, and play some live shows with original music. Tyrant Sin would then release a demo in '88 called Mutant Supremacy after Chris would rejoin following Leviathan breaking up. Shortly after this, Cannibal Corpse would form and release a demo tape of their own. Cannibal Corpse would also include Alex Webster and Jack Owen, previously of Beyond Death, inspired by the likes of Testament and Metal Church, amongst others. The singer for Beyond Death would also be their bass player Alex Webster, who would take up bass for Cannibal Corpse, seen here donning a Creator shirt. Creator, of course, being one of Germany's finest thrash metal exports since 1982, with their first LP, Endless Pain, in 1985. Creator, along with Sodom, Possessed, Morbid Angel, Death would be the main influences for Cannibal Corpse early on. A rehearsal space called Absolute Storage would be what brought Beyond Death, Tyrant Sin, and Leviathan together. They would all practice here and would all hang out and even jam with random members from each band. So when all of these bands broke up, they already knew who to call to form something new. We always really loved Tyrant Sin's music, so the idea of jamming with those guys was something that me and Jack were very enthusiastic about. I wasn't thinking about school or any of the part-time jobs I had. I was thinking about the band. And one of the first songs they started to write was romantically titled Skull Full of Maggots. This song, along with 4 others, would appear on the very first Cannibal Corpse demo tape, released in 1989, just 2 months after the band had officially formed. Only 200 copies were ever made. The demo was recorded at Border City Recordings with Dennis Führer, who also recorded Tyrant Sin. The name for the band itself came from Alex. He simply thought it sounded cool, and it's exactly what you might think it is. It's an undead zombie that's going to eat you alive. So the first official Cannibal Corpse lineup would be Chris Barnes on vocals, Bob Rusey on lead guitar, Jack Owen on rhythm guitar, Alex Webster on bass, and Paul Mazurkowitz on drums. And just around the corner, as their very first record.
Are you ready? Alright! This one's called Enter at Your Own Risk!
Eaten Back to Life would be the debut album from Cannibal Corpse, released on August the 17th, 1990, via Metal Blade Records. Metal Blade Records, of course, famous for releasing Slayer's first LP, Show No Mercy, in 1983. Also by 1990, the death metal genre had been fairly well established, and thrash metal was, of course, well underway. The artwork for Eaten Back to Life was created by Vince Locke, who also created the Dead World comic book series in 1987, an American comic book artist and author who has since worked on all 16 Cannibal Corpse studio albums that have been released to date. And the inlay has an interesting credit. It reads, "This album is dedicated to the memory of Alfred Packer, the first American cannibal." Alfred Packer was indeed a cannibal, but not really by choice or as a hobby. Born in 1842, Packer was an American prospector and self-proclaimed wilderness expert who had no choice but to consume his hiking buddies during the winter of 1874. The details of which are too gory to go into here, but if you want to find out more details, there is plenty of information out there. Nonetheless, this is one of the most interesting credits you're most likely to ever read in an album inlay.
But does that mean that you're always thinking of the next more offensive, more gruesome, more horrible thing that you can say?
Now, if you're familiar with Cannibal Corpse, then you'll know their song titles most likely won't feature on the front of any magazine covers. But if you're not, here are the song titles from their first record. And I honestly dare not say them for fear of the video being blocked or age restricted, but have a look. And of course, when you consider the music topping the charts in 1990, Cannibal Corpse wasn't exactly white picket fence material for the middle class. Madonna caused a stir with Vogue, Bon Jovi belted out Blaze of Glory, and MC Hammer was rocking his parachute pants with Can't Touch This.
Can't touch this.
Now, it's difficult to judge how well this album was received in 1990 when it first came out, as there don't seem to be any records of old reviews available. There most likely would have been something printed in small local zines and magazines. Unfortunately though, nothing seems to remain online. But I can tell you that more modern reviews haven't gone down too well with this record. The playing is uniformly savage and, alas, uniformly one-dimensional. On paper, Cannibal Corpse are the perfect death metal act, but in reality, their pursuit of lyrical and musical extremes was something of a joke from this first release on. Too many tempo changes, too much monochromatic double bass slugging, not nearly enough variety, texture, or interesting guitar work. Cannibal Corpse's single-minded devotion to their cause is admirable. Too bad the results of that dedication are not very interesting. Eaten Back to Life isn't much more than death metal for dummies. Death metal fans, though, often cite this as their favorite Corpse record. Some even consider this to be one of the best death metal records of all time. Which kind of sucks if you're Cannibal Corpse to be told nothing you've released since your first album has been better. But that's all just subjective opinion anyway. The 1990s in general, though, would be the decade where Cannibal Corpse not only thrived, but also go through some lineup changes and start getting banned from entire countries.
Death, we've been playing your video a little bit on the Headbangers Ball. And Cannibal Corpse, we get so many requests for Cannibal Corpse. So whenever I go to his shows, especially like I went and saw you guys play in Milwaukee, and everybody, especially your fans, love to scream at me and throw things at me about not playing your videos.
The 1990s would see Cannibal Corpse release an impressive 7 studio albums, all of which continue to explore extremely explicit, gory, and adult themes within the artwork, song titles, and lyrics. Original singer Chris Barnes, though, would part ways with the band in 1995. It seemed that internal creative conflict was slowly destroying them from the inside out. And Barnes had also formed another death metal group in 1993 called 6 Feet Under. That was the worst thing when we finally laid the music down with Scott and heard the vocals. We were so excited because we had so many great songs, but once we heard Barnes's vocals, we felt utter dejection. We were so let down by it. It felt like the air was let out of our tires because the vocals were detracting from the songs. There was a sense of dread because the songs were getting ruined. Even their producer at the time, Scott Burns, could see and feel the crippling tension between band members. Alex would take a deep breath, raise his hands, slap both hands on his knees and go, "Chris, we want you to do this." Paul would say, "You're just not doing it." Barnes snapped back, "You guys are assholes, you don't get my vision." My position was difficult. My goal was to get the best performance and sound from Barnes. I thought he would eventually budge, and they'd meet halfway. But song after song, it wasn't coming together. It was like Cannibal was going full speed, and he was only at half. In the same year, US Senator Bob Dole said this about Cannibal Corpse: "We have reached the point where our popular culture threatens to undermine our character as a nation. I would like to ask the executives of Time Warner a question. Is this what you intended to accomplish with your careers? You have sold your souls. But must you debase our nation and threaten our children as well?" Essentially saying that they, along with several other artists, films, and records, were making the USA look bad and undermining modern cultural progression. But how did a conservative Republican running for president even come to be made aware of such music in the first place? It certainly wasn't topping the Billboard 200 charts or being sung by church choirs. Many bands have received widespread public attention after being linked to popular films or general pop culture, and in 1994, Cannibal Corpse somehow managed to get a cameo role in one of the biggest comedy movies of a generation, Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, starring Jim Carrey. The film was released in 1994, and Cannibal Corpse are shown on stage playing Hammer Smashed Face, a song taken from their 1992 record Tomb of the Mutilated. This quickly became one of the most popular Cannibal Corpse songs thanks to this exposure.
Excuse me, is Greg here? Thank you.
This song, though, isn't one that many bands would even dare to record in the first place due to potential backlash, something Cannibal Corpse are no stranger to. Not many bands would do a song like Hammer Smashed Face, but we did. We were like, fuck it. We didn't care what other people thought. If you start to care about what other people think when it comes to writing music or lyrics, or anything for that matter, then you become their prisoner. Some people are going to hate you, but fuck them too. I'd rather do something great that only a few people like than something mediocre that a lot of people like. At first, Cannibal Corpse were very skeptical about appearing in the film. They didn't want to look stupid or really be made fun of. Even their record label, Metal Blade Records, thought it was a bad idea. But it was actually Jim Carrey himself that requested the band. According to Cannibal Corpse, on the day of filming, Jim was blasting Pantera, Deicide, and Napalm Death from his dressing room. He surprisingly knew all Cannibal Corpse records and also asked the band to play songs that even they couldn't remember how to play. Quite impressive for a Hollywood actor. The film itself was a box office smash hit, and Jim Carrey even publicly talked about death metal during an interview. On the 31st of January 1994, Jim appeared on the Arsenio Hall Show, a hugely popular talk show that ran from 1989 to 1994.
You were rocking out to the music. You like music, man?
I love music.
Jim Carrey mentions Napalm Death and even rips out a pretty impressive death metal vocal.
Great, it's great. There's this one band out that's called Napalm Death.
In this same time frame, you had MTV's Headbangers Ball, one of the most popular alternative music shows in the history of music television.
We never got nothing from that anyway. It never.
Headbangers Ball featured everyone from Ozzy Osbourne to Lemmy, Dave Mustaine to Dee Snider, and the mighty Pantera. So heavy metal was well and truly in the public spotlight.
Headbangers Ball, right now we're hanging out with Pantera at the Thunder Roadhouse Cafe in Los Angeles.
That also meant, though, that it was also under the watchful eye of the government and concerned parents across America and the globe. An article published by the Los Angeles Times on May the 31st, 1996, reported how another official, one C. Dolores Tucker, said, "Music conglomerates are putting money before the overall welfare of our children and the community. These companies have the blood of our children on their hands." Governments essentially wanted to censor any type of art that they considered to be offensive, and whilst they mostly directed their attention towards rap music, Cannibal Corpse and Lords of Acid were included within this musical witch hunt. This witch hunt seemed to spread fast and worldwide. In 1996, the sale of any Cannibal Corpse recording was outright banned in Australia and all records removed from shops. That, however, wouldn't stop the sadistically brutal music of death metal.
Well, the big one, obviously, is George in the band now.
George Fisher, born July 8th, 1970, affectionately known as Corpsegrinder, would replace Chris Barnes as singer in 1995. Fisher had somewhat more hardcore influences, being a fan of Bad Brains, widely regarded as pioneers of hardcore punk, forming in 1976. Youth of Today, Cro-Mags, and another hardcore punk group called Warzone, forming in 1983. Prior to joining Cannibal Corpse, Fisher was the vocalist for a death metal outfit called Monstrosity, having released 2 studio albums with them, Imperial Doom in 1992 and Millennium in 1996. And prior to this, he was in a death metal band from his hometown of Baltimore, Maryland, called Corpsegrinder. Fisher learned to sing, or I guess you could say develop his vocal style, by singing along to records he had as a kid and using a piece of wood as his guitar. Any record he owned that came with the lyrics on the cover to it, he would try to learn. Fisher first appeared on the 5th studio record by Cannibal Corpse, Vile, released May the 21st, 1996. And just like their 4 previous studio albums, it was equally as brutal and musically violent. Song titles from Fisher's first record include Orgasm Through Torture, Puncture Wound Massacre, and Mummified in Barbed Wire. Again, probably not songs you'd expect to hear at your average wedding.
And we all have plenty of ideas that are different than what we've done.
Barnes had already recorded some of the vocals for this record, so Fisher recorded his own to replace them. Fisher not only brought a new lease of life to what was once a dying band, but it also gave them more creative freedom, as it seemed Chris Barnes was potentially trying to control the creative process. I think when Chris was in the band, with a lot of the lyrics and music he wrote, it had to be a certain way, the way he wanted it. With George now in, we've all become a little tighter at writing things, working as a team, rather than following what was being dictated to us. I am just feeling a bit stronger about what I'm doing now too. My songs that I write and do the lyrics for are sounding as I had planned them to. With Chris in the band, I knew that when I took ideas to him, they would come back sounding just a bit different. It was never a problem, just an altered idea that did come noticed to me. 1996 would see the release of the second Cannibal Corpse music video. The first had been released in '94 and somehow managed to get airplay on MTV in the US and Europe. Staring Through the Eyes of the Dead, a song taken from the 4th studio record, The Bleeding, would be the first music video Corpse would release. It depicted what appears to be a person dying on an operating table. The Bleeding is also the first album with guitarist Rob Barrett, who replaced Bob Rusey, and the last Cannibal Corpse record to feature original singer Chris Barnes. The Bleeding is also seen by many die-hard fans as one of the best Cannibal Corpse records. Not the average video you would have expected to see on MTV in the mid-90s. Not to mention grunge was already firmly established amongst the alternative youth of America. Some of the top 100 videos in 1994 on MTV included Green Day Basket Case, Black Hole Sun by Soundgarden,
Black Hole Sun, won't you come?
And Snoop Doggy Dogg, Gin and Juice.
In the morning in the party still jumping cause my mama ain't home. I got some freaks in the...
Not gonna lie, one of my personal favorites.
You done missed the sign, man! So where we live at, we've been living there for 27 years.
So to see a band like Cannibal Corpse not only in a huge box office smash comedy film, but also being played on rotation on MTV amongst these other artists was quite something. We did, however, see some rock and metal bands topping the charts in 1994. Pantera with Far Beyond Driven, Purple by Stone Temple Pilots, and Vitology by Pearl Jam all reached #1 on the Billboard 200 chart of that year. Devoured by Vermin would be the second music video by Cannibal Corpse and the first to feature Fisher, released in 1996. This same year would also be their biggest touring schedule of their entire career. playing over 160 shows in 22 different countries. This included the US, the UK, Germany, Italy, Poland, Sweden, and even Japan and Serbia. Cannibal Corpse had truly gone global. Vile was also the first Cannibal Corpse album to hit the charts. It reached 151 in the US via Billboard 200. And although it only spent 1 week on the chart, this was still a hell of an achievement for such an aggressive death metal group. A clear sign that extreme metal had certainly earned its place amongst the ranks of other more popular genres. The Billboard 200 chart for that week also included Pantera's Great Southern Trendkill at number 21, Marilyn Manson's Smells Like Children EP at number 31, and then artists such as Celine Dion, Alanis Morissette, and the Fugees taking top spots. A truly strange and contradictory set of artists sharing the same musical space. Now, before we finish up, I'm trying to beat this guy on IG, and as you can see, I have quite a long fucking way to go. So I'd like to build up my own social following, and if you'd like to help out and drop me a follow, there is a link in the description below, and I would greatly appreciate it. To date, Cannibal Corpse have released an incredible 16 studio albums, and 8 of those have somehow managed to gain actual chart positions. Their first chart position was with 5th studio album Vile in '96, also the first appearance of George Fisher, and their highest position was number 32 with their 13th studio album, A Skeletal Domain, in 2014. Violence Unimagined, released in 2021, not only reached number 45 on the US Billboard chart, but also took several spots on several charts around the globe. And they still managed to achieve all of this whilst being attacked by US politicians, having their music banned in more than one country, and even having entire tours cancelled in other countries due to religious protesting. And not to mention, almost every album they've ever released has caused some sort of backlash or criticism due to album artwork, song titles, or lyrical content. Cannibal Corpse, however, quite simply doesn't care. It all gets old to us real fast when people take shots at the band. People who think we don't know how to play haven't really given the music much of a listen. As for the name and what has come from it, we knew what we were getting into when we named the band Cannibal Corpse. We wanted a horror-type name to go along with the brutal music we were playing. We had such a great cause for wanting to do this band. Our music inspired and excited us, and you have to understand that when you get all excited over something, you know there is always going to be that one person who won't like the situation. I look at all these bands who play it safe. I think a lot of death metal bands play it safe when it comes to their images, music, lyrics, and even band names. You'd be surprised who I thought played it safe. I won't name any of them, but you can see the ones who won't go out of their way to do crazy shit. It's also important to point out that in 1998, guitarist Pat O'Brien joined the group and has been credited with being responsible for developing the more difficult and technical songwriting styles of later Corpse records. And let's not forget, this is death metal. It isn't pop music, it's not hard rock, it's not alternative metal, it is by its very definition, extreme metal music. And it's entered the Billboard charts multiple times. There are very few extreme groups that have had this much chart success since maybe Slayer or Deicide. Slayer have released 12 studio albums between '83 and 2015. 10 of those records landed them chart positions in the US, with their final studio album reaching number 4 on the Billboard 200. Their highest ever chart position. Sure, you could look at Megadeth, but they aren't really classed as extreme, or at least not when compared to Slayer or Deicide. and definitely not when compared to death metal. So honestly, even if you don't enjoy their music, you simply have to admire the fact that Cannibal Corpse have managed to achieve something that very few bands of this nature will ever be able to match. They really should be considered as one of the true pioneers of death metal.